Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, on today's episode of What the Hell is Tettles Talking About Today, we have the 3 new affixes that have been approved onto the Shadowlands beta. They are Inspiring, Storming, and Spiteful, and they all do unique and eventful things. And all in all, I think they are interesting affixes that will kind of shape up the meta for Mythic Plus coming into Shadowlands. So, let's talk about them, give a little bit of a brief summary of what they are, and talk about how they're going to impact dungeons. First and foremost, we have Inspiring. Basically, Inspiring is very similar to the Emissary of the Tides, if you guys remember that seasonal affix from Beguiling, and you are unable to be able to kick associated mobs that are within 15 yards of the inspired mob. It's not an additional mob. Like, mobs in trash packs are going to be inspired, and then make mobs around them not be able to be like CC'd or kicked. The inspired mobs themselves typically will be able to be CC'd with full duration, so there's not any Emissary of the Tides interactions where there's PvP duration on your CC, so you're able to like paralysis, sap, blind mobs, and pull the trash pack away if there's really caster heavy stuff that's inside the trash pack. So you are able to play around this a little bit easier than Emissary of the Tides were. That's really nice. I think that the mobs seem to be fixed from dungeon to dungeon as well. As long as they don't change on like a weekly rotation, this will be very good because you'll be able to know where the inspired mobs are just beforehand. If they didn't think this through and they actually changed on a weekly rotation, it's going to be really annoying. And I just hate the idea that that's actually going to happen. Beyond that, how Inspiring actually feels is Inspiring will slow you down because you're going to have to CC some packs. It's just a matter of how bad it's going to slow you down. Right now, through testing, Inspiring does feel like the easiest to play. And the reason for that is because people are more adept at being able to deal with Inspiring style mechanics. As long as you know what mobs need to be kicked and like where everything is going to be, it should be okay. Spires of Ascension, though, is a fairly kick-heavy dungeon, and Inspiring in that dungeon is really annoying. Like, there are some positions where Inspiring will be more obnoxious than others, whereas like low kick dungeons like Halls of Atonement or whatever, everything's fine. Like, or Necrotic Wake, which is really bad for Inspiring because there's mages that do Frostbolt Volley. So it's going to be on like a dungeon to dungeon basis. But all in all, I think Inspiring is going to be a fairly positive affix, and I'm pretty hyped about that one. Next, Spiteful. So a lot of people are kind of complaining about Spiteful. And Spiteful as an affix is kind of similar to how the thing from Beyond works, except it's a little bit different. On death of mobs, there is I don't even know what it's called, like Spiteful Shade that ends up spawning, and it will fixate a random player. I suspect that once we get weak auras enabled, being able to tell you like which Spiteful mob is fixated onto you, people will be better at dealing with the Spiteful affix. I think right now people are incredibly bad at dealing with it, and if the Spiteful mob melees you, it'll like two-shot you. Basically, the Spiteful Shades do lose 8% of their HP for every second that it's alive, and they lose their HP even through abilities like Banish and Cyclone. So if you use a CC like that, then after the Cyclone or the Banish fades, the mobs will just immediately disappear, which is quite nice. I think using abilities like Ursula's Vortex, using an AoE stun whenever the Spiteful mobs spawn, typhooning them away, Shining Force, something like that, is going to be pretty good for dealing with Spiteful. I don't think this is really that bad. It can kind of be annoying for your melee who are not ready for the mobs for the Spiteful mobs to be spawning. I also noticed that Spiteful spawns off of pretty low HP targets, like a lot of neutral mobs. So that can be kind of obnoxious. It's going to slow you down a little bit. I would say more so than Inspiring. It's because you have to spend about 12 seconds out of combat after a pull ends to be able to fully drop combat and like mount up and then run to the next area. So I think there's a lot of interesting gameplay with Spiteful. I think right now people are really bad at dealing with it. But as people get more adept at dealing with it, I suspect that Spiteful will be one of the better affixes to play in the weeks to come. The last affix, Storming, is rough. Storming is like if Explosive had a really bad cousin. That's how I would describe Storming. So basically, actually, if Volcanic and Explosive had an ugly cousin, that would be Storming. Storming spawns based on how many mobs you have pulled, and it does the King's Rest style tornadoes that just swirl around the mobs constantly, and if they hit you, then they knock you back, or knock you up. The reason that it's annoying is because everything like around your target, and you can see this on screen right here, anything around the targets that you're pulling will have a tornado around them. And if you have a lot of mobs, there is going to be just a boatload of tornadoes, to the point where it's very hard for you to be able to walk into melee as ranged, and it's very hard for melee and tanks to be able to walk away from the mobs. Overall, I feel like storming is too punishing of a mechanic because of how many tornadoes that are currently spawning. I think if they cut down on the numbers of tornadoes that are spawning, and instead of spawning like per mob that you were in combat with, if they only spawned like 1 or 2 maybe, that would be more positive for this affix. I think all in all, storming is pretty poorly designed just because of how toxic it really is towards melee. Maybe it's just that people are really bad at dealing with it right now. Like that always has to be something that you take into consideration, is that it's a new affix. People are not always going to be that great at dealing with it. That's how I feel about Spiteful. I think people are just bad at dealing with Spiteful right now because they're not ready for it. But storming does genuinely feel like it's taken to the next level. Like Volcanic, I feel like is fairly easy for range to be able to deal with, because like, sure, you're going to have to cancel your cast, but you don't have to like watch for melee frontals from all of the mobs, dodge the tornadoes, and then like do a bunch of other melee style mechanical stuff while your space is going to be limited, versus Volcanic, where it's like the answer to Volcanic is being in melee for ranged DPS, but the answer for melee for storming is never going to be to stand at ranged. And honestly, it's actually kind of hard even for range to be able to get into melee as well. So I'm pretty anti-storming, if you can't tell. Overall, though, I feel like Spiteful and Inspiring are both 2 really strongly designed affixes, and with Skittish and Teaming going away, I'm pretty hyped to play this next season of Mythic Plus and Shadowlands Season 1. Of course, you guys can test out these affixes for yourself on the beta if you do have access to that. Leave a comment down below if you guys have opinions of your own. I feel like that a lot of people are probably going to be pretty negative on Spiteful, but again, I think that it's that people are not great at dealing with it yet. I think it'll just take time. But if you guys have differing opinions, I'm willing to hear them down in the comment section below. Again, check out all my stuff down in the description, my Twitch channel, my Twitter, all of that stuff. Make sure you guys like, subscribe this video, all that YouTube shit, and we will see you guys in the next video. Later!